Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for returning to our auditorium. And I certainly apologize. I asked you to come back at 1:15. I was all excited about the panel session. I forgot about a very special speaker who is here now. So if I may have your attention, I think I've got your attention. Before we begin our final session, it is indeed my honor and privilege to introduce you to an individual I have known a good 15 minutes. And what a fantastic 15 minutes it's been. You can have your wedding proposals or marriages, wedding proposals and births. 15 minutes with this lady will blow your mind. I kid, I exaggerate, but it is absolutely no exaggeration to say that this individual plays a significant role in all of our daily business lives. May I please welcome the administrator of the U.S. General Services Administration, the Honorable Emily W. Murphy.
I thought he was about to start singing Unforgettable. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for inviting me here today. Today is day 70 since I got sworn in, so it's fun getting a chance to talk. I think this might be the largest group because I understand there are about 430 people participating virtually today, and I'm really excited to be part of the Reverse Industry Day because when I was laying out my 4 priorities for GSA, ethical leadership, increasing competition, reducing duplication, and improving transparency, a lot of what today is about is starting that dialogue, but also getting insight into the ways where GSA or federal contracting creates incentives that reduce competition. For example, I understand you just did a role-playing exercise where you're looking at how all the factors that go into the decision to bid or to not bid. And so to the extent that we can understand what motivates industry to decide to bid on an opportunity, and we can hopefully take that information and translate it so that into contracting acquisition strategies will get increasing participation, I think it's going to open up a lot of opportunities for us to get to work better with industry, to be better partners, but also then to better serve our agency customers at the end of the day by getting them a more comprehensive set of solutions. So I'm happy to be here today. I know that I am keeping you from the last session on modifications, which goes both, I guess, into how do we increase competition by hopefully reducing the burden we put on you, but also transparency. How do we take the information that we're collecting and use it in the most productive way? Rather, though, than listening to me talk for too long, I just thought I'd ask if anyone had any questions or if I could take 1 or 2. I won't be here too long, but wanted to open it up and try and be as transparent as possible myself. So, in the back, I see someone's got there.
So we've heard a lot about this term competition, and I would like to hear what your definition of competition is.
That's a great question. All right, so my gut reaction on that is, and what I've been tracking is, how many, when we go out for competition, we only get 1 bid. That's what I'm really trying to reduce. The number of if we're making a conscious decision that we know going out that an award is going to be sole sourced, that's fine. We've checked the boxes and we've dotted the I's, crossed the T's, that's great. If we go out thinking we're going to get competition and we only have 1 offer, that's where I want to improve competition. I want to get more vendors participating, making sure we're getting multiple solutions, and that we're able to have a series of offers that we can evaluate. And they do give me a dashboard that I get to look at each month to see how we're doing on that. Please.
Hi. How do you see the centers of excellence that are being stood up having a positive impact on competition? Oh, sorry. How do you see the centers of excellence that are being stood up having a positive impact on competition as well as the end results that you all are looking for in terms of IT modernization and everything that supports that?
Thanks so much. I think that if we use the centers of excellence appropriately, what we should be doing is better defining our requirements up front, going into an agency, understanding what their needs are, which should then let us come up with a better statement of work, or which will make it easier for industry to bid on, better evaluate those, and then having the program management in place to actually see the implementation so that we end up with the solution we need. So it's not about GSA going in and building something for an agency. It's about us helping the agency buy what it really needs. It's very easy to buy the wrong thing. So trying to help agencies buy the right thing. Anyone else? All right, well, thank you all very much, and I will turn you back over for so you can, for the third and final session of the day. I really appreciate you letting me spend some time with you. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am, so very much. Really do appreciate your time on an extremely busy day. So, our final panel, execution, modifications and compliance, provides insight into how post-award modifications and compliance processes impact industry resources and costs in achieving government outcomes. So let's attend to how communication and consistent and clear instructions from GSA, or lack of them, affect industry's ability to modify their schedules to meet customer needs in a timely fashion. Please welcome Eric Crucius of Holland & Knight to lead our final panel.
Before we get started today, just a few housekeeping items. First, thank you so much for having us here. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. I know I speak for all of us, say what a privilege and an honor it is to be here representing industry and having a conversation. Second, and almost, if not more importantly, want to thank the folks who helped guide us through this process, the folks at GSA and the folks in industry. Amy, if you could just stand up for a brief moment. Amy Fedita, Vanessa Payne, and Kaz DiMaggio. Kaz, maybe. Thank you very much. And I'd like to just introduce the panelists just very briefly so you get an idea of where they're coming from. You can see it on the slideshow now. Let's start with Mary.
Hi there, Mary Embry. Hi, Mary Embry, Carney and Company. We hold PSS under SINs 520 and 874, also Oasis Pool 2 unrestricted, as well as IT 70.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sal Horowitz. I'm with Impact International, and we are a large company, and we have two schedules, IT 70 and PSS.
Got my own, thank you. Good afternoon, Claire Hines, Net America. We're a small woman-owned small business with 4 schedules, IT 70, PSS, 80 stars, and more recently, Aligned to Small Business.
Great, well, thank you, and thanks for the introductions. So our discussion today will be focused on a few broad categories, which you can see on the slideshow itself. Kind of our industry wish list, timely and effective communication, clear and consistent instructions, flexibility when possible, and a willingness to understand issues. So we'll kind of proceed under that general structure today in the context of a post-award geography. So starting with the effective communication and instructions, Saul, I'm going to start with you. What would make the process kind of more user-friendly on the post-award area?
Good question. It's interesting when you're a vendor or contractor like us dealing with GSA, because there are a myriad of details and regulations that are not things that cross our desk on a regular basis. So our company, and I think many other vendors, feel that it's the type of situation where we really need help. We need a consultant to come in and help us out, a consultant who does this day in, day out. Otherwise, there are pitfalls that we could fall into, and we don't want to do that. At the same time, once we hold the schedule, we feel that there should be enough ease of use of the system, both the electronic system and just the system in place to make a modification happen, that should allow a contractor to be able to handle it his or herself. Yet we find that very often we need a consultant even post-award. And I think part of that is that there can be an effort on GSA's part, we would love to see an effort on GSA's part, to work with contractors like ourselves and find out what's easy to use, is this system, is this screen the best way it can be? And my colleagues here on the panel and others, I'm sure, are willing, more than happy, to sit down and become part of committees to work with GSA and say, well, this regulation, this type of email doesn't really help us because it's full of jargon. Is there a simple method that we can use to communicate between GSA and the contractor community that doesn't get lost in jargon, doesn't get lost on difficult screens to use? I think that's a gray area where we could make a lot of progress. Yeah, we'll need consultants to help us through the regulation, the regulatory aspect of it, but I don't think we should need consultants to deal with executing a modification and what's the timeline, what to expect. There's a lot of, it's a gray forest out there, and I think that could be tackled by GSA with the help of the contractor community to ease that process.
Great. And before I go on, I want to turn over to you, Mary, in just a brief moment. But before I forget, this is an interactive session, so if you have questions, please feel free to ask them, and we'll try to work them into the discussion as we're going along. I know, Mary, to that end, you have a kind of a specific example dealing with the CSP, and I wonder if you could share that with us.
Absolutely. If you are familiar with the CSP, you're also probably familiar with how painful it can sometimes be when you're working with industry, trying to describe to them the needs that you might have as a contracting officer at GSA. But during negotiations with GSA for our second option year of one of our GSA schedules, our basis of award went away. So as a result, we only had federal clients, and as federal clients, you know, they don't offer commercial rates, or that means they don't have commercial rates. As a result, we wouldn't need a CSP any longer. However, for that second option year, and for the option years following that, our contracting officer was insistent that we prepare a CSP. And that was pretty painful for us. But in our final option year, we were able to successfully open the channels of communications with our CO, and they were able to understand that since we only had federal customers, the CSP was no longer necessary. So for our fourth option year, and for our final one, we were able to dispense with the CSP, and that wound up saving us about $5,000 in overhead fees and about $5,000 in consultant costs just for that option year alone and for the final one. So $10,000 might not sound like too much, but if you extrapolate that out across industry, and if you back that up to our prior option years where the CSP was previously not needed, you can see that that would have been a pretty significant amount of savings for us and also for GSA, because those overhead costs necessarily get passed back to the government, unfortunately.
Great, thank you, Mary. And Claire, just turning it over to you just for a little while, just talk about communications and instructions and how the importance of effective communication and being able to reach people.
Absolutely. And very similar to Mary and Saul's points, what I found, so I've been around in business 18 years, and I was foolish enough in the beginning to think that I could apply for and manage my own GSA schedules, which I did initially, but very painfully. And what I did find is that oftentimes the information that we get from GSA regarding our checklists do not match the workflow when we go online to do these modifications or changes. So one recommendation that we would like to make is that, just again to Saul's point, is to work towards matching the instructions that we get in the mail, which is usually the form of communication, to the workflow online, whether it's through the fast lane process or through the EMOD process. Because again, time is money, and because I am a small business, I'm not big like these guys over here, oftentimes I'm the one going online doing the mods because I sign for them. And so if there's a glitch in the system or something that was communicated to me via email or physical mail doesn't match what I'm seeing online, then I have to stop what I'm doing, pick up the phone, try to reach my CO, which oftentimes I can't reach the first 2 or 3 times, and time is money. And so for us small businesses, it's even worse. It takes literally hundreds of dollars per day out of my time to try to fix a glitch that we could have prevented.
And we have a question, and I think this kind of goes to your point, but I'd be interested to hear from Saul or Mary if they have any additional feedback. But what recommendation do you have for improving communications between GSA and industry? Any kind of specific recommendations, similar to what Claire offered?
For sure. One thing that would be really helpful is if you folks could take the time to clear out your inboxes and clear out your voicemails to allow us to perhaps leave you a voicemail to communicate our issue. Sorry, I know that you folks are so busy, but we appreciate your time and we appreciate the time you spend on industry. So if you could actually call us back or shoot us a note and let us know that you got our message and that you heard our troubles, that would be eminently helpful. So I would personally really appreciate that for sure.
I could just speak from experience. My cell phone voicemail was full, and I heard from 3 clients in one day that my cell phone voicemail was full via email. And that can happen very quickly. Sure, please do so, Saul.
Another idea that I have to improve communication would be something I touched on earlier, and that is if we could get a timeline of various contract actions, suggested timeline, nothing fancy, we'll get this in this letter this many days before the contract is due for an option, and then you could expect the negotiation to take place between this window and that window, back and forth, discussions, draft, final, that type of thing. I think that would be enormously helpful for us because it would help us assign resources internally when we're devoting ourselves to the contract modification.
It's a great point. And Claire, because we started kind of this discussion with you about sometimes you face a difficulty with communication. What impact does that have on your company, on industry overall, if there's a lack of communication as far as delays and things like that go?
Well, it can be crippling to a small business, and I'm sure equally disruptive to mid and large businesses. Again, crippling because our time is short. We're as short-staffed as you are, and we're trying to maximize our time and provide the best services and delivery possible to our clients. And so when I'm unable to reach a CEO or unable to find the answer to the glitch or the disconnect why I'm not able to continue a mod, for example, then it's very costly monetarily and time-wise. And it's just inefficient because, as we all know, we're so distracted these days with cell phones, work phone, regular phones. And when you begin a process of working through a mod or some other change in the system, and you have to put that down, now that whole thought process has stopped, and you have to pick it up and figure out where was I, start all over again in essence. So you're duplicating effort.
And I think it's an important point to think about is that contractor margins are much smaller than they used to be, where you're seeing negative profit margins or up to 5%, where it used to be higher than that. So those little glitches in time can add up potentially to your bottom line very significantly.
Absolutely.
And let's just talk about kind of going through that impact of delays on industry. Mary, let me turn to you. You had an issue or an experience with an economic price adjustment. I thought I'd just ask you about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we experienced a significant delay at one point in negotiating an EPA with one of our multiple award schedules. So at one point, we're trying to work through these negotiations, and it took about 18 months. And to be honest, the pain point was about 0.1 and 0.2 percentage points. So that was the variance that we were quibbling over for 18 months. And for a year and a half, you have to consider the fact that the EPAs, they're typically lower than industry standard. And then we need to retain, as a professional services firm, we need to retain our quality workforce. And that's pretty difficult to do when we are stuck with a low annual increase, and then we have to pay our people at a competitive rate in order to retain them and provide quality services to the government. And so when we were unable to escalate our rates to the government, we ultimately wound up paying our folks more than we could charge. So we're necessarily taking a hit on that. And by taking that hit, we were able to retain the majority of our people, which was fantastic. We were able to continue to provide quality services to the government, which again was fantastic. But we did lose about $7,500 during that time. And again, that kind of seems like a small number, but at the time we were a recently graduated mid-sized firm. We just flipped from small to large. We were growing really, really fast, and so that hurt us. And a small firm like Claire's might not have been able to take that hit. That might have been devastating to them. A large firm like Saul's, they might not have even noticed it. But
It's a decimal on a spreadsheet, you're saying. No.
right, but for us, it was more than a decimal and less than devastation, thankfully. But if you factor in the thought that we have got to, make minimum sales on this schedule, we were having a tough time making the sale to our internal people to use this schedule. So we were skipping opportunities left and right. We were hesitant to use that schedule because we were just gonna lose money on it. So while we were going back and forth with GSA on these 0.1 to 2 percentage points, that was pretty tough for us to deal with. We didn't want to lose the schedule, of course, so we did the best that we could, and we did the best we could to avoid losing people, because if you lose people, you have to rehire, and then cost and overhead goes back to the government, and it's just that painful cycle that happens over and over again. So that was a definite impact that we would like to avoid in the future ever again, but that is something that we dealt with for sure.
And you, just hold on to the microphone for 1 second, you're not off the hook yet. But Mary, you talked about retention of workforce. Does your, as a professional services company, does your company compete with non-government contractors in retaining workforce?
Absolutely. Because we only provide services to the federal government, and as Eric was mentioning, our margins are pretty low. We try to do the best we can to keep fair pricing so the government wants to retain us. But we get our people snaked left and right because we have a tough time. We have a tough time paying our people competitively and retaining competitive rates for the government. So that is definitely a struggle that we face on a daily basis.
And this doesn't have to be just for you. I don't want to seem like I'm picking on you. But is there a high cost for businesses when trying to replace employees like that and put them back on the contract?
In my opinion, absolutely. I mean, there's costs that cross all sorts of thresholds. So there's, of course, the cost of recruiting. Then there's the cost of finding and interviewing. Then there's the cost of onboarding and training and getting that individual up to speed. Then there's the cost of convincing your government customer that this replacement individual retains qualifications better than or greater than the individual they are replacing. So all of that gets rolled into our overhead costs, and again, it gets pushed back to the government when we have to continually make a spend on something that we probably shouldn't have to or that we would prefer not to.
Claire or Saul, you have anything to add to that? Or go ahead, Claire.
Yeah, absolutely. It's even more crippling for us as small businesses because we usually have to use outside recruiters, especially when we're recruiting for high-level SMEs or professional employees. And that cost can be in the tens of thousands for certain labor categories, especially in DHS space and in the DoD space. So very, very costly for us.
Okay. Go ahead, Saul.
Yeah, I'll just add another point. To the end customer, the ordering agency could feel the pinch of losing a valuable person who's working on their project because, as Mary mentioned, until you get the replacement and until you train them up, if they're key personnel, it could literally stop the project dead in its tracks.
And Saul, since you have the microphone, let's still deal with delays, but kind of a little bit of a change and delays, and talk about the online system and latency issues with that and the impact it has on your company.
Certainly. I have a little bit of experience in using the EMOD system, and I will tell you that it runs very quickly on Sundays. Unfortunately, during the week, I know there's a huge load on the servers, and but sometimes it can affect our day-to-day business. So if we're changing somebody's email, I've spent 40 minutes changing one person's email, and I'm just stuck in front of the screen, and it's at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or something like that. So if somebody at GSA could possibly look into whether or not there's enough bandwidth, I can tell you there isn't. I don't think there is, but if something could be done about that, that would really help contractors of every size in something as simple as a little modification.
Yeah, and to that point, it might just be a simple case of load balancing on the servers, because I've experienced that as well. And Saturdays are also not as bad after 4 p.m., but who wants to do that on a Saturday night? So yeah, I mean, if GSA could take a look at that, it might be a case of balancing by region, perhaps. I mean, obviously, I don't know how the infrastructure and the architecture is currently configured, but that may be a quick fix.
So the lesson here is that you're supposed to work weekends. And let's talk about something that's working very well, in the opinion of the panelists. I'm just kind of a spoiler alert there. Fastlane. Claire, can you talk about Fastlane, how it's impacted your workflow?
Yeah, I mean, in spite of some of the latency we find when we're just doing regular everyday mods, if you will, Fastlane has been a tremendous improvement. And I've experienced it again because I've been there from the beginning when I did the traditional submission. But we did recently have to do a Fastlane mod, and it only took 4 weeks for us. I think some may have even faster situations. So we know that GSA is doing a lot to improve those kinds of operations, and we certainly appreciate that. And we did want to share with all of you that Fastlane is working, and there's certainly other things that we could, keep working towards to improve. But we like what you've done so far, so please don't change that. And I think for me, it's all been positive.
Saul?
Same.
Okay. And Mary?
I actually never had the pleasure of using Fastlane, but I can tell you that there was one instance where we were adding about 3 special item numbers to one of our multiple award schedules, and we got that through in under 2 weeks. So even without Fastlane, with open communication and the fact that our contracting officer knew what we were trying to do, was trying to help us grow our business and bolster the use of the schedule, we just pushed that mod right through, smooth sailing, probably about 10 days, and that was amazing.
One other area that has been brought up is, and I'm trying to incorporate questions as we're going along, is the impact of COs changing on a regular basis. Has that caused delays? Claire?
Yes. I think I've gone through about 6 COs. And again, for reference, I'm small. Even though I've got 4 schedules, there are some schedules that require more CO interaction. And it causes delays in the fact that, we now have to relearn one another because it's all about communication. We view our partnership with GSA as that. And so what we start off with is just trying to share what our business is all about and trying to better understand from our CO what his or her concerns are and what their main goals are, which is to make sure that we are fully functional and operational on the GSA schedule. But it can be very disruptive. So, I think it's just the luck of the draw. We've noticed a tremendous turnover in procurement offices throughout the government, not just GSA. And to that point, it just delays everything, as well as even the procurement cycles. I think, when we have a situation where we've got a brand new CO, and let's say I happen to not be readily available because I'm working on something else at the time, it may take a couple of weeks for me to get back to that individual to share with them exactly who we are, what we're about, what our experience base has been with GSA, and it just takes time, and time is money.
Thank you, Claire, and that's very helpful. What a kind of a different side of a different coin. I know some of you deal with multiple COs at the same time. What would it be like, or would you be in favor of having everything consolidated into one contracting officer to speak with? Claire, you look like you want to say something. So.
Oh, well, it depends. It depends on the CO. We have some COs that fully understand the professional services and the IT space where we are, and there are some that are not so familiar. So if we happen to get a single CO that understands us inside and out, then I think it would make for a very smooth process. But if we got one that was not as well versed in the kinds of work we do and the special challenges that we have as small businesses, then it might make for a little bit of a difficult situation.
And we have a question, I think, in the audience here.
Yes, so I'm hearing you when you say about open communication. Is it really open communication, or is it the CO's knowledge and expertise on your business line or it depends on how long they've been with you? Because of course, if they've worked with you for 5 years, they know, but if it's a new CO that's come in that does not know your business line, then of course, it's going to take a little time to get them up to speed, even though if they're reading your contract. So is it really the open communication? Because you said you got yours through in 2 weeks and, you know, the person knew what they were doing. So is it really the open communication or is it really the CO's knowledge, in your opinion?
It's actually both. Initially, it's being even able to contact and reach our CO and actually speak with them, because sometimes we can resolve a lot of things by phone. And then on the flip side of that, yes, it would be wonderful if we had someone that was ideally knowledgeable about general IT services, but we understand that that's not often realistic in every situation. And we can work with that. But if we get a CO that is more used to dealing with commodities or products, then they're not going to be centered to the services industry, and that can be a little bit difficult.
Anybody?
If I could jump in on this. So I understand that there is a lot of pressures on contracting officers to basically be experts in everything, because you have to deal with all kinds of industries. So if you did perhaps want to suggest centralizing one contracting officer across, you know, one company, then that contracting officer would necessarily have to gain a level of expertise about that firm. And when you're talking about open communication versus expertise, I really do agree with Claire that it's for sure a two-way street, because I don't think that you could gain any level of expertise without that effective communication, a willingness to ask questions. What does your firm do? Why are you asking for this modification? Why is this important to your schedule, and why do you need it? If you are willing to ask us, we would for sure be willing to answer you. And that might enable everybody to understand and get on the same page and thus smooth the path forward for everything. And in my opinion, and in my experience specifically, we have had such great success because while we have had multiple contracting officers flipping year by year in some occasions, we have always had a really excellent experience when they've been willing to ask questions and to get on the phone with us, even meet us face to face on one occasion, just to talk through what we want, what we do as a firm, and what we need. And that high-level understanding of our professional services industry has been immeasurably invaluable in our success, at least in my opinion and experience.
Great. Saul, you want? Yeah.
I can jump in on that also. In our experience, we have not seen a lot of turnover with COs. I don't know how I would feel if it happened more often, but one thing that I wanted to mention, and it's been said already, we can't expect all the COs to pick up the phone and call every contractor. I mean, there would be nothing else to do. I mean, it's more than 24/7 job. What we have done in our firm, and it sounds like Mary and Claire do that also, is we pick up the phone and we try to be in touch either via email, by phone. I happen to prefer phone because I'm a little old school in that way. And what has happened to us and would be helpful, I think, across the board, is for COs to reciprocate. Maybe not initiate that phone call, that's too much to ask, but you know, if there's a message, call us back, or engage in a dialogue once the phone is picked up. And we have seen also, similar to Mary, we've had tremendous success with the COs that we've engaged on the phone. That's been very, very helpful.
Great. Does that answer your? Go ahead.
And I have one more question. You spoke about consultants. And so I want to ask you, do you work with the consultant up front during your pre-award to walk as they're preparing for you? Do you walk with them through the solicitation process so that you can understand it, so that once you've been awarded, you understand what you will be challenged with, or no, that's the wrong word, I'm sorry, what you will be working with as you are the contractor for that schedule that you're working with?
I mean, I'll take that. So, yes and no. Yes, I fully understand what the contract will require of us, absolutely. And, but the process is often very laborious and unnecessarily so. So hence, we now have to hire consultants to help not just navigate, but because they have, maybe they're speaking to the COs every day. They have a different relationship. Maybe they can come walk the halls if they happen to be here or out of state. And so they have a different, ability to pick up the phone and get a response from the CO, whereas the CO doesn't know us from the next company. And so that makes it a little bit easier for us to get what we need. But certainly, we all have to understand what the schedules require, and by all means, we do. It's just, it can be really, really time-consuming. And I know it is for you as well, but it can be really, really time-consuming for us. And because there are, nuances to it that we're not versed in every day like those consultants, sometimes it just makes more sense from a monetary standpoint to have them do it.
And yeah, and it's, I guess the process is irregular enough that you don't have the institutional knowledge or can't afford to carry somebody for all those times where you don't need somebody on a regular basis.
Oh yeah, I couldn't. There's no way I could afford it. I can barely afford the consultant when they're actually doing it. I mean, we're talking $30,000, $40,000 to get the application through. And that's usually the capacity in which we have used consultants. I don't need a consultant to do the management or the maintenance. It was more so in my particular situation, an IT-70 issue, that I actually, bit the bullet and hired a consultant. But the big guys can afford to do that, every day. And I think, again, it's more of a practical reason that they do that.
So since Claire referenced you really quickly, do you have a full-time consultant to help with GSA?
I'm going to get you back for that, Claire. Okay? No, we do. Well, we don't have an in-house consultant, but we contract with an outside consultant.
And why outside versus inside?
Because I don't think we have that much contract activity that would warrant a full-time person.
Okay. We do have some questions, and I'm going to work into this discussion that are relevant to our discussion as we're going along. So if you've asked a question, I will work it in. Let's just talk about the flexibility of the process, which is one of the bullet points on our slideshow. And Claire, I'm going to talk to you about your beliefs on a holistic process, maybe education of small businesses, and your thoughts on the process being kind of more flexible, an experience that you've had with that.
Well, yeah, so that goes back to that whole hiring of a consultant or not. In my situation, where I would like to see some flexibility is in how GSA treats or applies the requirement for the 25,000 use per vehicle. And in my particular case, I'm jaded because I had a situation where I lost my IT-70 schedule, my first IT-70 schedule, because I had not met my $25,000 threshold, which was very clear right up front, this is what you had to do. And by every indication, we felt like we were going to be able to do that. So I fully understand it's all part of GSA's policy, but I would certainly like to make some recommendations to have GSA take a look at that, because times have changed from when those policies were developed. And in my case, I had a MOBIS schedule at the time that was being utilized and therefore had more than met the 25,000 threshold. It was upwards of $2 million at that moment. And so I was making an appeal like, hey, I'm using the MOBIS over here. Don't kick me off IT-70, because I had these proposals in the hopper that had already been submitted. And, but, it was a case where I just had a very inflexible CO at the time, and I lost that GSA schedule. So that was when I had to go out and hire the consultant. And I literally just had the consultant reapply for an IT-70 schedule, and I was awarded another IT-70 schedule with a different number, but everything else was the same. My labor rates were pretty much the same for that period of time, and it just seemed like an unnecessary, cost and expense, not just on my part, my $35,000 I had to spend, but on the part of the GSA as well, because you guys had to review the proposal all over again, and not much had changed. And, again, because times have changed, when those policies were written, federal procurement cycles were shorter, much shorter, 6 to 12 months. Now we're looking at 18 to 24-month procurement cycle, just even in the small business space. So I don't know what you guys face, but we can't procure anything of substance for any less than that these days. And with all the continuing resolution situations that we've been in, it's even been longer than that. That's just the average that we've seen. And so certainly some flexibility on GSA's part in taking a look at those policies and see what's perhaps dated that we can modify, such that, again, I'm only speaking for small business. The big guys may, not worry about this. But one recommendation would be, if you see a small business like mine that's doing well on other schedules, utilizing the PSS, which is what my MOBIS evolved to, or utilizing an Alliant or an Oasis, whatever it might be. Don't kick us off this other one because we haven't happened to be successful on this one thing. Because clearly we've proven that we know what we're doing. We just haven't had the good fortune of winning something on IT 70.
Yeah, go ahead, Saul.
I have a slightly different experience in this regard than Claire. We had a Schedule 70, and we were developing a new line of business in our company, and we did not make the $25,000 threshold. Our CO was actually very understanding about it. She asked me, what are we doing? Are we trying to sell it? You know, can we demonstrate that we've been responsive to proposals and the like? And when we did that, she was actually quite good about it, and they gave us an extension on that. But that was fairly recently. I don't know when your experience was, but I think GSA is hearing that a little bit more.
Yeah, mine was a while ago.
And what kind of extension did you get, and did you meet the threshold after receiving that extension?
We got another year. We did not, and that's one of the reasons that we went on the. We got the health IT SIN, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later today, to develop that, because that's more of our sweet spot. So we hadn't really hit our sweet spot in the 2 years, but GSA was really wonderful about it and very understanding.
Great. So just talking about modifications, since we're kind of dipped our toes in that water a little bit, I'm going to ask you, Saul, what are some critical things that make a modification successful?
Critical things that make a modification successful. Well, I'll go back to communication with the CO and understanding expectations, making sure that the package is complete. Obviously, we're talking about a modification of more than just somebody's email or point of contact. But let's say we're adding SINs. We have to do our homework. We have to make sure that we've done all the analysis that's necessary, so there is no rejection. And I would also reiterate what we said earlier about maintaining a steady stream of communication with the CO.
Great. And Claire, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, certainly, again, not to belabor the point of communication, but probably just to revisit that whole checklist thing and making sure that the checklist matches the instructions checklist that we get matches what's online, and the steps that we are actually going to go through online will make for a smoother process.
Okay. And Mary?
Getting back to the checklist thing, sometimes what's on the checklist might not be necessary. So if we circle back to my first example about the CSP where it wasn't needed, we had a CO that was very insistent that we submit a CSP even though we had no data to back it up, just because we had to check that box. But it wasn't necessary in the long run, so a little bit of flexibility and understanding there went a long way at the end of the day.
And this is a question we received from the audience. What do you find is the biggest hurdle to adding new services to a contract? For example, cloud services to IT under a new SIN. What is the biggest hurdle you face when you've tried to do that?
Can you repeat?
Sure. What's the biggest hurdle you've faced when trying to add new SINs to your contract?
Understanding of our industry has been a significant hurdle in trying to add new SINs, but I'm sorry to again belabor my point from earlier, but when we were able to have our CO understand why we were trying to add certain new SINs and certain labor categories, that went a long way because they understood that with these additional SINs, we could grow our business, we could grow our use of the schedule. And then when our multiple awards schedule is being used more extensively across agencies, of course that's better for GSA and that's also better for our firm.
Great. And Saul or Claire, do you have anything to add to that as far as what the biggest hurdles are when trying to add new SINs to a contract? Or have you found that there are really no hurdles in adding new SINs to a contract? Or have you not added new SINs to a contract? It's really three choices there.
One hurdle in adding a SIN is making sure the market is ready for the SIN, I think. And we just added the health IT SIN to our Schedule 70, but the market isn't ready for it. It doesn't appear to be ready for it. We actually have had the pleasure of real tremendous outreach from GSA, from that schedule, and several people from the the business development of that part of GSA came out to our premises, had a discussion with us, and we had a special interest group that was founded. I don't know if anybody is here from that, is part of that, the behind the scenes with that. And there was tremendous effort being exerted by GSA continually to do so. And we have committees to try to market that SIN to the rest of the federal government. So I think that's something that's really working well. Actually, that was going to be one of my things. Don't change that. There's tremendous outreach, and it's been very, very helpful. So I think part of a challenge in adding a SIN is knowing whether or not there's a market for it.
And I think we have a question from the audience here.
Related to adding a SIN or adding labor categories or adding products to your schedules, when you look at the written instructions and you're thinking about pricing, is the information that you're asked for on the written instructions, does that match what you're asked for in your verbal negotiations? Does anything different come up? And what about GSA's new horizontal pricing comparison? How has that been affecting you?
Well, I'll address the issue of just when you're adding a SIN and adding labor categories to your overall schedule as a result of the addition of that SIN. We've had a situation where we were adding 3 additional labor categories because of that SIN. But our CO wanted to take a look at the labor categories that we had already approved, that had already been approved earlier on from our prior SINs. And that can cause some problems because it belabors the point, it delays the addition of that SIN, and it's not required. And so it doesn't match. When we're adding a SIN, it's very clear the steps that we're supposed to go through, and we follow those steps to a T. But sometimes, depending again on what CO you get, they think that they have to now go and revisit the other labor categories that were already awarded as part of your other SINs. And that can really cause us some delays. In my situation, we were able to negotiate and explain away that, no, we don't really need to do that. These are the only labor categories that apply to this SIN that we are adding now.
And Mary, you want to add?
Yeah, following on with what Claire said, so we understand that GSA is well within their rights to go ahead and review the labor category pricing when we're going ahead and adding new labor categories. But I just want to point out that that can sometimes be a hindrance. We don't necessarily want to ask to add these labor categories. We get a little gun shy of asking to roll these new labor categories and rates in because we worry that that's going to kick the door open for a whole new round of negotiations. And then kind of along these lines, there's guidance out there for the contracting officers to not necessarily consider the fact that as industry, right, we get our GSA schedule rates. And then the ordering agencies, they will almost 99.999% of the time ask us for discounts on those rates. So we understand that as GSA COs, you don't need to consider that when you are factoring in all of the considerations in approving or rejecting or negotiating our industry rates to you. So with that in consideration, we know that you don't have to think about the discounts that we have to offer. And we know that GSA is in the business of doing their due diligence, protecting the government, and negotiating fair and reasonable rates for the government. But I just want to point out, again, that that can really harm industry when we are trying to negotiate reasonable rates, retain quality people, especially in professional services when we need to be able to pay our people competitively in order to retain them. So while you might not need to consider the fact that we have to discount our rates at the task order level, that's something that we as industry must consider.
And let me add on that. So I learned the hard way because remember, I was the one that did the application myself initially. And so when I was doing my first schedule, which was the MOBIS schedule, I actually prepared the labor rates and prepared them reasonably and honestly based on what I was procuring or what labor category staff that I actually had at that time. Because you have to show your payroll proof and everything. Unbeknownst to me, because I didn't have a consultant, I didn't realize as a new business owner that we were going to be required by other procuring agencies utilizing those GSA schedules to discount the master rates, the master labor rates. And that really cost me a lot of money because at the master level, my rates were realistic. with, very, very little margin. And so when I went to procure at the task order level, agencies were asking me for 20% discounts. I'm like, no way, I can't even find anyone for that. So that did cause me some problems. So I think there's a disconnect somewhere between what our GSA CO usually asks for at the negotiation table and what the agencies think that they should also ask for at the task order level. So I'm not sure where that falls in the grand scheme of communication and revisiting labor category structure and price structure. But there's a huge disconnect there. And for, again, small business perspective only, I had no clue that that was what was going on. And, it can really, ruin your business if you don't know that.
And I think this plays in very well to a question that we just received through the interwebs. But just talking about industry engagement with GSA, and I'm not going to ask you to show hands, but ask if you've had experiences with this, recognizing that you're representing industry, but you don't represent the whole of industry because all your experiences are very unique. Have any of you attended GSA Industry Day training sessions before? And if you have, what kind of benefit did you get from that? Does anybody have any comments about that or anything?
Well, I have, and certainly it's always good to be able to understand what the other side is dealing with. And so it's just as it's good, we're happy to be here today so that you can understand our perspective. We're also very eager to understand GSA's perspective because it all goes into how effective our communications become. We understand that you have a job to do, and we also have a job to do, and we have to be able to deliver. And so what that industry day was afforded me was certainly a little better understanding in the challenges that the CEOs face when they're trying to manage, all these thousands of contractors.
Great. And just another kind of part of that, the help desk. Have any of you utilized the help desk? And if you have you found it to be helpful? Claire, you have the microphone. You're hot. Go ahead.
Well, yes, help desk. I call them a lot. No. Well, yeah, back to that point about the currency of the information that we get. A lot of times when we face a glitch in EMOD and we call the help desk, they're aware of the glitch and they'll give us the workaround. But, I may be on hold for an hour before I get some help. Which again, we're all overworked and understaffed, right? I understand that. But the help desk is certainly a crucial piece for us in being able to do our piece to make sure that our contracts are maintained in current capacity. But, they're aware of the situation. So perhaps the help desk somehow, hopefully they have a mechanism for letting the IT folks know when there's a glitch in the system and how to put in a change order to make sure that the system is changed.
Great. Anybody else have experience with the help desk they'd want to share? Or, yeah.
I've had a very positive experience with the help desk. I'm pretty well versed with a lot of the folks over there, and I found them to be pretty well versed in the assistance that they can provide me. I will point this out, though. Sometimes the help that they offer is inconsistent with the instructions that are on GSA's website. So that just might be something for y'all to consider if you ever, have the occasion to bring this up with your help desk folks.
And speaking of website, GSA's website, have any of you worked with or gone through GSA's website when you needed help, instead of calling the help desk, to familiarize yourself with the tools that are available? This is a question that we received. And if so, have you found that to be helpful or needing improvement in some area?
Yeah, so again, I did that in the early days because remember, I didn't have a consultant like these guys. So, that was my tool. I went there to get assistance. And, there's a wealth of information out there, no question. And I think GSA has done a tremendous amount of work in improving some of the videos and demonstration types of instructions that are out there today. I haven't been on there since I submitted my Align 2, but I'm sure that, there's some stuff that's been added since then, which was a couple of years ago.
Okay. And one last part of this question, there was a few parts to it. Do you all handle the mass mods when they come in? Do you see them when they come in? And Mary, if you could kind of talk about the workflow internally when you receive a mass mod, what exactly happens at your company?
For us, we get a mass mod. Sometimes it gets kicked to the president/CEO of our organization, where it will cycle for a long time until it finally filters its way down to the lowly admins. But once the admins do get a hold of it, we filter through all of the changes. And it takes a fairly long time for us to go through, pull all of the FAR clauses and GSAMs and everything that might have changed, run a compare merge. We are fortunate in that we do retain an external consultant who takes the time to summarize this for us, but a firm such as Claire's might not be as lucky. So she might be stuck doing the compare merges herself to see what the changes are. And so once we finally get through, we've got to get buy-in from all of our upper level admins that we're okay with the changes. We frequently don't feel like there's any room for negotiation if we do disagree with some of the things that are being incorporated into our schedules. So it's a necessarily, we agree with all, and then we kind of move forward with it from there.
Great. Is there, for the mass mod process itself, is there anything that, Mary, and I'll open up to Claire and Saul too, is there anything that you think that can improve with the process that would help out filtering through these requirements?
Personally, while I do really appreciate the high-level summary of the changes of the clauses that have been added and deleted and removed, if there would be a way for GSA to perhaps distribute a high-level verbal summary of what the changes were, that might be helpful as well, as
Okay.
opposed to just, the name and number.
Claire or Saul, do you have anything to add?
Well, I mean, similarly, I get the mass mod email, but thankfully I've got another executive in my office that usually goes through and does what Mary just described, making sure that the FAR clauses are those that we can sign off on. Because I sign off on them, he does that step and then gets it back to me. Usually by then, he's done a further extrapolation of the summary. So, it's succinct enough for me and I'm clear in what the mass mod is asking for or calling for. So I'm not quite sure what else we could, what else GSA could do. There is a lot of reading to it, no question.
Okay. And thank you for the question. If you have further questions along those lines, please feel free to send them in, and especially the folks here live as well. Let's talk about annual and end-of-term assessments, switching gears a little bit. Mary, what's been your experience with these versus CAVs, for instance?
I love them. I absolutely love them, which is probably an odd thing for you folks to hear, but I really feel like the annual assessments are a much less painful process than the CAVs. The industry operations analysts that we work with, they're generally very upfront and forthcoming with the details and data and all the information that we're going to need to provide. And having that information upfront, allowing us to prepare, consolidate, and get everything ready to go, it has been so helpful. I know that the face-to-face time is pretty important, and a lot of the times the face-to-face assessment can be very helpful. But we have found that these electronic and virtual audits, if we've got somebody doing the assessment from, regions out in California or whatever, or out in the Pacific Northwest, having them be able to remote into our systems and we can just drag and drop a file for them. They can go ahead and review quickly and easily. That has been so much less difficult than going through the CAVs. So that, to me, it's really kind of reduced them from a 3-person, week-long, 2-week-long process to basically just requiring one individual to spend one day vetting the files, making sure everything's pulled together, and then the assessor remotes in, does their due diligence, and they're in and out. But I do have, aside from the positive experience we have, I do have one, qualm to complain about a little bit. There was an issue that we did encounter where we encountered significant pushback and a really tough line of questioning just based on a lack of understanding that the assessor had of what we did. So there was very client-specific labor category mapping that we had to do between our GSA schedule and between what the client RFQ was. And the assessor was having a bit of a tough time understanding why we had a very expensive Auditor 2 labor category as opposed to our staff auditor labor category, which is pretty low. So in that case, it just was a matter of the assessor not wanting to look under the hood and read the labor category description. And that line of questioning basically extended the assessment from, that one-day process that we've become used to about a week or two of just pretty painful back and forth that could have been avoided had the individual just, taken a look and done the review and seen what we had mapped to as opposed to what they were just seeing at face value.
Great. And Claire, I wonder if you could share your experiences as well.
Yeah, mine was a bit of the reverse. We had remote assessments in the earlier years, and more recently, in the last 2 or 3 years, we've had in-person assessments, which I prefer. Again, that face-to-face gives us the opportunity to connect with the assessor and, you know, just be able to, again, teach a little bit more about what we do, and they get a chance to see our operation and see some of our staff and exactly how we work. And it just makes for better, effective communication for us. You know, I like the idea. This particular time, again, normally I am not involved in the all-day or 2-day assessment, but the last one I was, just because the person that would normally do it was unavailable. And in that instance, I did notice that, again, you know, we get the list ahead of time of what to prepare in advance for the visit, which is great. I usually hand that off to my finance staff, HR staff to prepare. And in this particular instance, they had requested some HR files, which of course I pushed back on, and you know, clarified that no, you know, this is HIPAA information, but we can certainly provide you with the resumes to match the labor categories for the individuals that were being assessed. And once we did that, it went smoothly. But you know, there's inconsistencies again with checklists and things like that. And if someone else had been doing the assessment, then they might have violated HIPAA regulations if they'd provided that file. So just, you know, caution there. But overall, it's been an excellent experience for me.
Great. And Mary, I think you have a follow-up on that?
Yeah, just one note. One of the assessments we had, there was a bit of a geographic issue that came up. So our firm, we're based in, you know, Alexandria. So being in the DC area, we're pretty economically insulated. So our rates, is based on Department of Labor and market research, they're going to be a little bit higher than they might be in, say, Huntsville, Alabama, or out in Indy. And in one case, the assessor was looking at our rates for a contract that we had won. I think it was out in Indy. And that particular contract didn't have a wage determination associated with it. So our rates were pretty low. And when going through the assessment, there was a lot of questions about why are your schedule rates so high versus why are these rates out in Indy so low for this fairly large contract that you hold. And so that, again, we were able to resolve through communications, pointing out that, okay, this over here in Indy, their cost of living is significantly lower than somebody living in DC. And so while there were a lot of questions and there was some initial pushback on that, the understanding that different geographic locations might garner different wages and different rates that might be lower than what's on our schedule actually, that wound up being resolved. But that was just an issue that we had to, you know, go through with our assessor.
Okay, and I've kind of heard that kind of scenario just somewhat similar where you have maybe a labor category 2 and your price is higher than maybe some of your competitors. So GSA comes in and says, hey, your competitors are have the same labor category, but it's much lower in price. And then you have to scramble and find out, you know, why and what the differentiator is, and go to industry and find ones that are higher priced, or maybe look under the hood a little bit further. And now that the burden's on you to find, to explain why your price might be a little bit higher as well. And I'm guessing by your nods that maybe you've experienced that as well or heard about that happening.
Yeah, absolutely. For us, you know, we do work in the DHS and the DoD space, and so a PM2, for example, with a secret clearance is going to be a bit higher than a PM2 working in USDA. And those are just, you know, factors that we have to explain at the time that we're doing the assessment or submission for those rates. But there is a distinction, and I too work in the Metro DC area, and you're not going to find adequate resources sometimes for some of the lower level PM rates, as an example.
Okay. And we have a question from that came in electronically, and I apologize. It's a little bit cut off my screen, so I'm going to read it as best I can. Have you taken advantage of the contract assessment visits conducted by IOAs to gain knowledge on overall contract compliance areas or business development ideas, or for customer service improvement ideas, business intelligence ideas, et cetera? Does anybody? Go ahead, Claire.
Well, we have. Again, because I personally was involved in the last assessment that we did, and as president and CEO of the company, I take every advantage. And, you know, not just to receive information and input, but also to share our experiences to see where we can, learn something. There's always room to learn. And I found the assessor, the IOA this time, was very open. That's why I found it to be a very excellent experience for me. And it could have been that it was wonderful all along, but because I wasn't particularly participating in the earlier ones, that I didn't see that right off. But it was a very positive experience for me. And she actually had some excellent recommendations, because I'm always complaining about that IT situation, that IT 70 situation. It was 10 years ago, guys, but it was very painful, as you can imagine. And
still
I'm still
remember it
feeling
pretty well.
it. Yeah, every time they mention it, I break out in a cold sweat,
Which you need today because it's pretty warm out today. Okay, switching gears a little bit, and Mary, I'm going to come back to you on end-of-term schedules and new schedules. Talk about the situation where you're negotiating maybe a new schedule, but you're dealing with the last term of your old schedule.
Right, so this is a not so unique situation where a lot of the times your final option year of your schedule is coming up, and as you're negotiating those final year rates, you're also in the business of putting together your proposal for the replacement schedule. And when my company was going through that whole scenario, we were going through extensive and prolonged negotiations with GSA, trying to finalize the last option year rates of this schedule. And after about $30,000 in proposal costs and about over 400 man-hours in just trying to get this done, GSA totally blew my mind and was eminently reasonable in the fact that they were like, hang on a second. All these negotiations that we have done, everything that we have worked for, this has given us significant information and sufficient justification to roll these final option year rates into your new schedule. And so as a result, we wound up saving, I don't even know how many dollars in negotiations that we might have had to go through with GSA in order to establish our new schedule. So GSA was able to basically do all the technical assessing that they needed to do, but they were able to fully document their file and do their due diligence and just fold in our final option year rates into our new schedule. And so that was something that I had never seen done before, but it just really seemed to me that common sense won the day there, because GSA won on that one, because there was no further negotiations needed. You didn't need to open the whole new can of worms and go through it all again. And Carney won because we saved us a significant amount of money in negotiations and overhead costs as well. And so I think that came up as a win for everybody on that particular situation. So instead of full-blown negotiations for no good reason, GSA's reasonableness and application of common sense totally blew me away and won the day.
That's great. And just before we leave you, what's the general cost, or what was the cost for your company to apply for a new schedule in money and man hours?
So yeah, it was 450 hours and about $32,000 to prepare a schedule for a mid-sized firm, a schedule bid for a mid-sized firm rather.
And the $32,000, what does that usually cover? Is it outside consultant expenses and things like that, or?
Outside consultants' expenses are not factored into that. That was all overhead for us.
Okay. We had a question come in on the dichotomy between, and I'll try to just change the question around a little bit, the master contract and the task order level contracting officers, and maybe some of the challenges associated with that. Claire, I wonder if you could talk about the kind of the challenges that you sometimes face when dealing with the master versus the task order level.
Well, at the master contract level, we're dealing obviously with our CO at GSA. And at the task order level, we're dealing with the agency CO, whatever the agency that happens to be, whether it's civilian or defense. And as I mentioned earlier, at the master contract level, we know GSA is trying to get the best price, but I think oftentimes they're not aware, or maybe they don't understand the degree to which the COs at the task order are going to be requiring or expecting discounts. And so there's this fine balance that we try to keep between making sure that the master contract, GSA contracting officer understands how our pricing is based and mapped and built up. And at the task order level, depending on, let's say again, speaking of the PM2 category, if there's a security requirement required or some other higher level element of that PM, that would not necessarily be factored in by another task order procurer that would allow us to give a better discount or deeper discount. But there are challenges, no question, and it's just a fine walk that we make at the moment.
And I think one challenge, just kind of off of that I've seen is in the master contract level, is the Service Contract Act, for instance. And that's a labor statute that's fairly complex. And DOL's position is that the Service Contract Act is not self-deleting at the task order level. So if you have a contract, a task order with 50 doctors and 1 nurse, that 1 nurse may be covered by the Service Contract Act. And I think there's not an awareness necessarily in the contractor community that these individuals who are normally would not be on a Service Contract Act contract are actually on the Service Contract Act contract because that clause is in the master contract, and like I said, DOL's position is that it's not self-deleting. Claire, have you seen kind of interesting scenarios with that?
Yeah, disturbingly interesting, actually. So this was at the, for GSA 8A STARS contract, and it was for Service Contract Act work that was being performed out of Georgia, not in a major city, but in on the outskirts. Nonetheless, we were aware of a situation where at the task order level, the procuring agency allowed the winning vendor to accept labor rates that were below the Service Contract Act required labor category and labor rate, which also happened to be below minimum wage. And so I did raise the question at the time that to the Master Contract Office CO to alert them that this was going on, and but there was a shrug of shoulders that, you know, that's up to the procuring agency. So it does then beg the question, why is it at the master contract level if it's not going to be, you know, effective?
Right, that's a good question. It's more of a policy question, I guess, but it's still an important question to ask. And
Absolutely, because it's confusing to us. You know, we're trying to do the right thing as the contractor, regardless of which agency we happen to utilize that GSA schedule with. And we also expect our fellow contractors to be equally as observant. But it can be confusing.
Right. And we have about less than 10 minutes left, so if there are questions from the audience here that are live or on the computer, now's the time to ask them before we run out of time. But a couple of closing questions I thought that we've discussed. Mary, what would be your kind of takeaway for folks who are listening and watching here? And then we'll move on to a question about what not to change, that we really like what's happening. So I don't want you to be your closing thoughts.
Sure. The takeaway that I would love you folks to walk away with is we are an industry partner. We understand that you must do your due diligence, but I don't want this to be an adversarial relationship. The more willing you folks are to reach out, call us, answer our phone calls, and discuss, the better it will be for both of us, I think, in the long run. So that would be it.
Okay. Saul, Claire, do you have anything to add?
Sure. I'll just reiterate a point I made a little earlier. Please work with us to try to simplify some of the areas that can be simplified. Certain things cannot be simplified, and we get that. But if something can be simplified in the process, some of the things we've discussed earlier, we in the industry would be very happy to sit and work with you and have little workshops or get-togethers or committees to try to bang out things that can be done to simplify the process.
Okay.
And for us, again, representing small business, yay, is to, you know, where possible, look at the policy, as I mentioned, those that are dated now. For example, that $25,000 threshold. Yes, the threshold needs to stay, but given the extended period now for procurement cycles being 18, 24 months and higher, to perhaps extend the period of time that threshold has to be met, or perhaps consider, certainly again for small businesses, that if a small business is utilizing their other GSA schedules successfully, that you know, there's some credit given for that fact, and just, you know, hopefully not have other small businesses go through what I did, which was having to lose a schedule, you know, spend money I didn't have to use a consultant to procure it right back.
Okay. I know in our discussions in preparation for this session, there were a lot of things that you all pointed out that you were really happy with how GSA did them. So this is the section we call Please Don't Touch That. Please don't change that. So Claire, since you have the microphone, why don't you talk about things that you don't want to see changed, that you really like how it works?
Absolutely. Yes, please don't touch Fastlane unless you want to make it faster. I definitely like that, and I tout it wherever I go. I do some mentoring for other small businesses just starting out, and I try to give them some lessons learned so that they learn from my mistakes and hopefully do things a little bit quicker, better, more efficient than I did. But I do tell them about Fastlane. Definitely go that route.
Okay, and Saul?
I mentioned earlier the outreach that we've received for the Health IT SIN. I think that's fantastic. I think wherever GSA could do more of that, it would be great. But I think today is something that I don't think you should change. The whole concept of this reverse industry day, I'm very honored to be here. My kids are very excited. I'm finally going to be on YouTube. And I think so, yeah, right? Melissa, you promised me, right? No, I'm just kidding. So kudos to Melissa and the whole office of the Ombudsman. I think this is just a fantastic concept. Let's do more of it. It's great. Thank you.
If my toddler knew I was going to be on YouTube, she would have given me a sticker to wear on my suit, probably. So I'm glad. Go ahead, Mary.
The one thing that I would love for you folks to not change is, in my experience, your willingness to understand what my company does technically and to kind of dive into a bit of what our professional services industry does and what we need from you folks. So to me, that's been immensely helpful and has contributed to a great successful partnership between GSA and my firm.
Well, I always love to finish on a positive note. We have a couple of minutes left, and we do have one more question, so I thought I'd ask all the question. When a contractor becomes aware of a mistake or an issue with something that GSA has done, when do you find is the best time to engage with GSA about this, and how do you engage with GSA? Saul, you're looking at me, so I'm going to call on you.
I'm still thinking about YouTube, but okay. I don't know that I've actually encountered this type of problem, but I think what I would do is pick up the phone and call my CEO if there's some sort of issue. Over the last few weeks that we've been preparing for this session, I've learned more about the Ombudsman's office and the role that they play. I've never needed to use them before, but at least we know that that's another option if we hit a brick wall, which I've never yet hit.
Okay, Mary? And then Claire.
When we encounter issues or troubles or problems, what we tend to do is we wait until we have to request a modification, and we try to roll the communication into one consolidated item, so that way we're not peppering our CO with question after question, and that way we can hopefully get it all knocked out in one fell swoop. So if that is not something that would work for GSA, we would love to know that, but that's how we approach it.
And have you found that's been effective so far?
Yes, I found that to be a very effective approach.
Okay, and Claire, do you have anything you want to finish with on that?
Yeah, similarly, if it's something that can wait till some other collective communication that is expected, then we do that. If it's something that can't wait, in fact, I had a very recent situation. Like I mentioned with the Alliant to Small Business, we did have a correction that had to be made right away. And we contacted the CEO, and he got back to us in like 10 minutes.
Wonderful. Well, I think with that, we're just about out of time. I don't know, we have about a minute left, but we have no more questions, and I think we've covered everything we were going to cover. So again, we want to thank you for having us here today and allowing us to share our thoughts. And again, thank you. We look forward to seeing you soon.
So, hey, everybody. Again, panelists, thank you so much. But audience, give yourselves a hand. My gosh, what a day jam-packed with knowledge and information. And we thank you so much for being here. But to close these proceedings, please welcome the U.S. General Services Administration Senior Procurement Executive, Mr. Jeff Kosis.
Afternoon all. Thank you all for coming, for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed the variety of sessions and the different styles that were presented for sharing information. Let me start by thanking everyone for participating, beginning with our Acquisition Ombudsman, Melissa Gary, with her team. I see Henry over there. Sam Claiborne's put together key parts of this. Quinn Go, all of the outside help who've joined the effort. Some great help and support from Montrez putting together. As you saw during the course of the day, we had a number of industry associations actively involved, took time, made the investment, felt that there was great value in sessions of this sort. You saw a number of our industry partners spend a lot of prep time trying to share insights, trying to provide meaningful information to all of you. I thought our administrator set a great tone this afternoon when she talked about some of her key priorities. She talked not just about ethical leadership, but she spoke about competition. She spoke about transparency. She was really driving some key messages. When she talks competition, she gave us her definition. She was really talking when we're going out, when we're seeking competition and we only get one bid in the process. She mentioned that she looks at a monthly dashboard that deals with that. David Fry, who puts that together for us every month. Thank you, David. GSA across the board, last year we spent about $11 billion. We had an 80% competition rate, making us top tier among federal agencies. The minister's definition, 85% of that was true competition, was at least 2 or more responses. Events like this are intended to address, to drive that, to give us insights in what goes into industry decisions, whether or not to compete across acquisitions. Across the 3 sessions that we heard today, there are some messages that I thought stood out that we heard over and over again. We didn't just hear about competition, but we heard how that competition about communication. We heard how that communication drives different decisions. We heard the vast majority of firms who are using hired consultants to help them in managing aspects of their scheduled contracts. And we heard estimates in the $25,000 to $32,000 range for the cost of some of that support. We heard the cost of proposals and how that was driven by the way the task order request was structured. We heard about $100,000 when a video was added as part of that. We heard about a large LPTA acquisition where just the bid and proposal cost approached $500,000. We saw a really interesting role play, and I hope you all liked the role play, took something out of that, a very different learning style, a way to get a message across. But within that, you really heard how the industry players were trying to divine meaning into our communication. What did the RFI say? What didn't it say? And what did we actually mean behind that? When we asked for a rough order of magnitude, what was how was that driving decisions? And we saw them cross-examining that and reading all kinds of interesting meanings, many of which we never intended to be placed there. But knowing that, understanding that, helps us to move some key things forward. With this concluding panel, we echoed a number of earlier themes, and we really even dove deeper into some of the compliance and oversight concerns and how that drives good decisions. We had a couple of call-outs to keeping policy modern, to open communication, to understanding the business models that we're dealing with. For the day, we had 430 different participants across the country. We had every region participating, tremendous attendance. We have our next session scheduled for April 10th. That session dives deeper into the public building service. It's going to look at issues involved in leasing, in construction, and some of the other key things that drive this. I want to thank everyone who helped put today together. The key message, again, not just communication, but why that communication matters, why that drives the competition rate for the agency. All of you who participated, you've earned continuous learning points for the day. I think, Lisa, if somebody participated in all the sessions, that was 4 points? Yes, 4 continuous learning points. Tremendous. Hopefully some of the most useful points that you will get all year. 4.5, round it down there, don't do that, okay. So with that, let me adjourn this session. And again, thank you all for participation. Industry guests, thank you for being part of this.